Hello. I'm Walter Briggs. 2 hours before a 3-star general saluted me, I was nearly thrown out of a base commissary for taking too long to pick a can of soup. He looked at my old flight cap and said I was just a retiree clinging to past glory. Then he mocked me, loud enough for a little girl to hear, like I didn't belong. Like I'd never done a damn thing for this country. But he didn't know the name behind that cap. He didn't know what Eagle 09 meant. Not yet. Do you think a name can still shake a room, 50 years after the world thought you were dead? Ellipsis. I'd been standing in front of the soup aisle for what must have looked like forever. Not on purpose. I just couldn't make up my mind between tomato basil and chicken noodle. Both hit differently on cold mornings. And that morning was colder than most, dry air. Sharp light coming through the high windows of the base commissary. My knees ached more than usual. My hands weren't cooperating either. I held one can up, squinting at the sodium count. They're all salt bombs these days. I felt the presence before I heard the voice. You spend enough years around soldiers. You can feel tension before it speaks. Is there a problem here, sir? The voice wasn't kind, sharp, measured, a little too proud for a man his age. I turned slowly and got my first look at him. Polished boots, stiff posture, major rank on the collar, clean cut, face tight like he practiced that stare in the mirror every morning. No problem, I said, just reading labels. He planted his hands on his hips like he was about to direct traffic. You're holding up the aisle, he said, louder this time. Some of us have work to do. I looked around. The aisle was empty except for us and a young mom half a dozen feet away pretending to compare brands of canned beans. Her little girl peeked around her hip to look at me. I nodded, polite, didn't mean to block anyone. I placed the soup can back on the shelf. My fingers moved slow, arthritis was loud today, but I didn't rush. Didn't see the need to. That only seemed to irritate him more. He shifted his weight forward. You retired? Yes, I answered simply. Got an ID? Now, this wasn't about soup anymore. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the same worn leather wallet I've carried since '71. Slid out my veteran ID. Held it out for him to see. He snatched it. No thanks. No nod. Just a snatch. Looked it over like he was inspecting a counterfeit bill. Squinted at the expiration date. Turned it over like there might be a hidden message. It's valid, he muttered, flipping it back toward me like it was something dirty. You're technically allowed here, he said, but that doesn't mean this place is for you. I didn't answer. I put my ID back in my wallet, folded it slowly, slipped it back where it came from. Silence makes some men uncomfortable, makes others downright dangerous. He didn't move. Why are you here, anyway? He asked, voice dipped in sarcasm, trying to relive the glory days? Swap war stories in the soup aisle? I looked at him then. Not up, not down, just straight. I'm here to buy groceries. That seemed to annoy him more than anything I'd said. Like my not reacting was some kind of defiance. From the corner of my eye, I noticed the mother with the cart slowly backing away. Her little girl was still watching me. Eyes wide, she pointed a small finger toward my hat. Mommy, he's got an eagle on his cap. Her mother hushed her gently and wheeled them away. But the words lingered. I reached up and adjusted the brim of my cap. The patch had faded long ago. Just the outline of a winged eagle left on frayed fabric. I'd sewn it back myself with field thread after a rough landing in '68. Stitches still held, even after all this time. He saw me touch the cap. You wear that thing like you earned it, he muttered. I didn't flinch. I'd heard worse from men who meant better. I did, I said quietly. He let out a dry laugh. Like he didn't believe me. Like he didn't care either way. Sure you did, he said. Push papers? Maybe ran coffee to pilots? I didn't answer. Didn't need to. I turned to walk away. Didn't want to waste more breath. Thought maybe that'd be the end of it. But he stepped in front of me. You don't belong here anymore, he said. People like you, you're just slowing the whole system down. That's when I heard a shift in the room. Just a whisper of it. The way attention gathers, a few quiet murmurs. Carts stopping, eyes glancing over shelves. Not full on spectacle, but close. I could feel it. I looked past him, toward the far end of the aisle. Sunlight hit the waxed floor just right. A long strip of gold pointing down the row of soup cans. I could leave, could back off, walk away, let the day go back to being normal. But that little girl's voice echoed again in my head. He's got an eagle on his cap. Not the words, the wonder in her voice. A reminder that some of us may be faded, but we are not erased. I met his eyes again. Not angry, not smug, just steady. I earned my place here. Same as you. He opened his mouth, but someone else beat him to it. You sure about that, Major? A voice from down the aisle. Older, grizzled, calm. We both turned to see a man walking our way, not fast. Not slow, confident, warrant officer rank, tall, stocky build, scar across his chin, eyes that had seen enough. Looks to me like you're making more of a disturbance than he is. The man said, stopping a few feet away. Trent stiffened. This is none of your concern. Everything on this base is my concern. The man replied, especially when I see disrespect in uniform. I watched Trent's jaw tighten. But he said nothing, not yet. The silence between them stretched tight, ready to snap. I knew then. This was only the beginning. Ellipsis. Major Trent let the word hang in the air like it was some kind of joke. His lip curled, but his eyes never left the other man, Chief Warrant Officer Grant Keller. According to the patch over his heart. You've got no authority over me, Chief, Trent said flatly, so unless you're here to shop or spectate, I suggest you move along. Keller didn't budge, he didn't blink, that calm, unmoved expression stayed right where it was. And somehow, that seemed to irritate Trent even more than my presence had. I stood quietly off to the side. My hands rested on the handle of my empty shopping cart. My back ached, my legs stiff from standing too long in boots that had outlived their warranty. But I wasn't tired, not in the way that made me want to sit down and give in. You don't have to say anything, sir, Keller said, turning toward me. I saw everything. I gave him a quiet nod, just enough to say thank you, but not enough to stir the hornet's nest any further. Trent stepped forward. So you're taking his side? Keller cocked an eyebrow. Side? I didn't realize courtesy was a matter of sides. That earned a few stifled chuckles from nearby shoppers. One of the young airmen near the end of the aisle tried to cover it with a cough. But the sound was enough. Enough for Trent to know people were watching now. That pride he'd been carrying like a badge began to slip. Just a little. You all think this is funny? He snapped, raising his voice, loud enough for the whole aisle to hear. Because let me remind you, I'm the ranking officer here. The laughter vanished. Trent turned toward me again. Eyes cold now, calculated. This man is not active duty. He said, he's a retiree. And from the looks of it, long out of date. He's loitering, obstructing other shoppers. And now he's part of a disturbance that's distracting base personnel from their duties. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about authority, control, saving face. I'm ordering you to leave the exchange immediately, he said, and if I see you on base again, I'll have security escort you off. A few people gasped, not loud, just sharp intakes of breath. I didn't move. Not because I wanted to challenge him. Not because I thought I could win a shouting match. I didn't move because I'd stood my ground in places far worse than this. And I didn't need to shout to be heard. My voice came low, even, just enough to reach his ears. I have every right to be here. Major. You're dismissed. That was it. No more talking. He turned, as if that closed the book. But that's when the little girl came back. She must have slipped away from her mom. Or maybe curiosity got the best of her. She walked up to me, eyes still on my cap, and tilted her head. Is that a real eagle? She asked. Her mother caught up a second later, breathless and red-faced. I'm so sorry, she said quickly, reaching for the child's hand. Come on, honey, don't bother him. It's not a bother, I said. I took off my cap slowly and knelt to her eye level. Joints crackling like a campfire log. It's not a real eagle, I told her, but it flew with me for a long time. She smiled. Cool. She reached out and touched the patch gently. Just a tap of her fingers. Then she walked off with her mom, turning back once to wave. I stood slowly, put the cap back on. When I turned, I found the aisle had quieted. Keller looked proud, Trent looked like someone had thrown ice water on his chest. "You're making a mistake," he muttered. Keller shook his head. "No, sir, you are." Just then, I heard it, a new sound. The clicking of heels down tile. Controlled, measured steps. The aisle went dead silent. And then he appeared. Tall, gray temples, pressed uniform, eyes like twin searchlights scanning the storm. Lieutenant General Raymond Hale. He didn't speak at first. Just took in the scene. Me, Keller, Trent. His aide, a young woman with dark hair and a clipboard clutched to her chest, stood 2 paces behind him like a shadow trained to disappear. Hale's gaze landed on me. Something flickered behind his expression, not recognition. Not yet, but something. He nodded once, not to Trent, to me. "Is there an issue here, gentlemen?" he asked, voice like steel wrapped in velvet. Keller straightened. "Sir, Major Trent was in the process of—" I asked him, Hale said, eyes still on me. And for the first time that morning, someone asked me like they actually wanted to know. I looked the general square in the face. "No issue, sir," I said. "Just shopping." There was a long pause. Hale glanced at my cap. Then back at my face. "What squadron did you serve with?" he asked. I didn't answer right away. Didn't because I could feel something shift. I didn't know what yet, only that it was coming. "Sir," Trent interjected, trying to salvage control, "he's refusing an order to leave the—" "Stand down, Major," Hale said. And this time, the order carried weight. Everyone stood still. Even the air felt like it held its breath. Hale took a slow step forward. "What's your call sign, son?" he asked quietly. He called me son. The title hit me harder than I expected. I stared at him for a moment, wondering, weighing. And then I said it. "They called me Eagle 09. The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. But they landed like a dropped stone in still water. And from the look on General Hale's face, they might as well have been a detonation. Ellipsis. I've seen men freeze before. In battle. In boardrooms. In front of the wrong question at the wrong time. But I'd never seen a general go pale like that. The second I said it, Eagle 09, the color drained from General Hale's face. His lips parted, not in disbelief but recognition. Deep, buried recognition, like a ghost had just called his name. He took a half step back. Subtle but real. His aide looked up from her clipboard. Eyes wide. The clipboard dropped an inch. Hale swallowed. Slow. Eagle 09, he repeated, softer than before, as if saying it any louder would summon something he wasn't ready for. Major Trent looked from me to the general. Confused. "What is that?" he asked. "What's an Eagle 09? No one answered. Because everyone who should have known, already did. Hale turned toward his aide and murmured something. She disappeared down the aisle without a word, moving fast and quiet like someone trained not to run unless the missiles were already flying. He turned back to me. "Can we talk somewhere private, sir?" "Sir," from a 3-star general. That made a few heads turn. I glanced around. People were pretending to shop again, but no one was looking at the shelves. I nodded. "I'll follow." Hale motioned to Keller. "Chief, escort Mr. Briggs to my office. Get him anything he needs, coffee, water, whatever." Keller gave me a quick glance. Something like pride behind his eyes. Then he stepped in beside me, nodding like he'd been given the most important assignment of the day. I began to walk, slow but steady, didn't limp, didn't hurry, I kept my head up. We passed Trent on the way out. I caught his eyes just long enough to see the panic creeping in. He opened his mouth, maybe to protest, maybe to save face, but Hale turned his gaze on him. Cold. Controlled. Deadly quiet. "Major Trent," he said, low and level, "you are to remain here. When my aide returns, you'll accompany her to base legal." Trent blinked. "Sir, you will surrender your command. Effective immediately." There was no shouting. No dramatics. Just the sound of a man's career being stripped away in real time. "You'll be confined to quarters until further notice," Hale continued, "pending full review of your conduct and fitness for leadership." Someone let out a low whistle. Trent went stiff, face turning an unnatural shade of red. He looked at me like I'd cast a spell on the entire room. "You don't even know who this man is," he said, voice cracking. "You're going to ruin me over an old veteran in a soup aisle?" Hale's eyes narrowed, ice and fire both. "You think that's an old veteran?" he asked. He stepped closer. "Let me educate you, Major." And that's when the story began. Not from me, from him. The year was 1969. Hale said, loud enough for the nearby aisle to hear. Airspace over the Thach Ha region had turned into a bloodbath. A squadron of our best was sent in under blackout, a classified operation to intercept a hostile advance. But things went sideways. One plane returned. His gaze turned toward me, but his voice stayed on Trent. One. He paused. And the man flying that jet took out 9 enemy aircraft in a single engagement. Alone. The room went still. Even the buzz from the freezer case behind us felt quieter. "That man," Hale said, stepping back and pointing directly at me, "was Eagle 09. Trent's face fell. Literally. His mouth opened but no words came out. It was like watching a student realize he just insulted the author of the textbook he failed to read. "He was listed as killed in action," Hale continued, voice tighter now. "His file sealed under levels you don't even know exist. But I knew the legend. We all did." He turned toward me again. And for a moment, all the stars on his shoulder disappeared. He was just a man, standing in front of another man he never thought he'd meet. "Sir," he said, softer now, "we were told you didn't make it." I nodded. Slow. That was the idea. Keller stood beside me, silent but reverent. "And you never came forward," Hale said, more statement than question. I looked him in the eye. "No need to. I did what I was asked to do. That was enough." He nodded once, like it hurt. Then turned back to Trent, who hadn't moved. "You didn't just insult a veteran," Hale said. "You humiliated a living legend." Trent's legs finally caught up with his brain. He shifted back a step, clearly wishing the floor would open and swallow him whole. I didn't know," he stammered. "Exactly," Hale said, "because you never asked. You just assumed." He paused. "And now you're going to learn." Hale's voice shifted from reverence back to command, crisp. Full authority. "You will spend the next year at the Air Force Heritage Research Office. You'll read every classified file we can legally unseal. You'll learn names, units, call signs. You will know what it means to wear that uniform." Trent stared at him, stunned. Then Hale said something I'll never forget. "You pointed your ego at a man who flew through hell and came back with smoke on his wings." That one stuck. I didn't say anything. Didn't need to. I adjusted my cap again. Out of habit. The fabric was thinning now. The stitching barely holding. But the symbol was still there. That eagle never stopped flying. As Keller guided me down the aisle, the silence behind us was almost holy. Only sound was the gentle creak of my cartwheels and a freezer door closing somewhere far off. We turned the corner. And I heard the general's final words to Trent before we left earshot. "You think today was punishment?" Pause. "This is your first lesson." Ellipsis. The walk from the commissary to the command building wasn't far. But it felt like a journey. Not for the distance. For the shift. There's a way things feel when the air gets heavier. Not from weather, but from attention, from weight, from memory. Every step I took, I felt the quiet eyes of people I didn't know, watching not out of curiosity, but respect. And something else too, something like disbelief. Chief Warrant Officer Keller walked at my side. Slow and deliberate, not guarding, accompanying, escorting, like I was someone worth standing next to. We passed a couple of airmen outside the motor pool. One of them straightened up instinctively, offering a crisp salute before he realized I wasn't wearing a uniform. Keller returned it without a word, but the gesture hung in the air. I gave a nod. I didn't have a uniform anymore, but the code still mattered. When we reached the command building, Keller opened the door for me. "Sir," he said, and he meant it, "I'll get you that coffee." The word "sir" still sat strange in my ears. It wasn't unfamiliar, just forgotten, like a song from another decade I thought I'd never hear again. I nodded. "Black, if it's still allowed." He smiled. "Still is." He disappeared down the hallway, boots thudding gently against polished tile. I took a moment, standing just inside the entryway. The place smelled like fresh wax and old decisions. Clean walls, mission boards, flags hung with precision. An airman behind a desk stood up when he saw me. "Mr. Briggs? General Hale will be with you shortly. You can have a seat over there if you'd like." I didn't sit. Not yet. Something in me needed to stay upright. Not defiant, just grounded. Present. I'd stayed invisible so long. My instincts were still catching up to this new reality. Keller returned a few minutes later with a styrofoam cup in hand. "Not base mess quality," he said, "but it'll do." I took it, wrapped both hands around it, felt the heat press into my palms. It wasn't the coffee I wanted, it was the warmth. The ritual. "Thank you, Chief." He gave a short nod. The kind only one enlisted man gives another when words aren't necessary. We stood there quietly for a while, not talking. That's when the door opened behind us and Hale stepped into the lobby. He wasn't in a hurry, but he wasn't moving slowly either. He had that posture, the kind that says, "I've been through wars. And I still walk like I own the air I breathe." "Mr. Briggs," he said, his voice even, his eyes steady. "General," I replied. "Come on back." I followed him down a hallway lined with framed black and white photos. Pilots in flight suits, squadrons in formation, planes in mid-dive, frozen in time. I recognized one. The edges of the frame were newer, but the image itself was old, faded. A team of 5, standing in front of an aircraft that doesn't exist anymore. We weren't smiling, just standing, focused, young. "That's your team, isn't it?" Hale asked, stopping in front of it. I didn't answer right away. Then, it was. He nodded like he understood the weight of that single word. His office was quiet, wood desk, flags, a small bookshelf lined with binders and history books. No clutter. He gestured toward a leather chair. "You're not under any orders. Mr. Briggs, this isn't formal. I'd like to hear your version of the story." I sat down. Carefully. The chair gave a soft creak as I settled. He sat across from me, elbows on his knees, hands clasped together. And for a few long seconds, we just looked at each other. No words, no pageantry. Finally, he broke the silence. "You were a myth. You're not the first to say that," I said, sipping the coffee. He let out a quiet laugh. Not out of amusement, out of awe. "I trained on your story," he said. "In the academy, they told us about the 9. But no names, no faces, just the legend of Eagle 09. That's how it was supposed to be. You flew solo into the worst kill zone we'd seen since Korea. Took out 9 aircraft in 32 minutes. I said nothing. You ejected over enemy territory. Survived behind lines for 6 weeks. They told us no one could do that. Someone did." He leaned back, looking at me like he was trying to decide if I was real or just a very convincing ghost. "Why didn't you come back?" I stared into my cup for a moment. Then I met his eyes. "I did come back," I said. "I just didn't want to be seen." "But why?" "Because war isn't something you frame. It's something you survive." He nodded slowly. I could see something shift in his shoulders. "Do you regret it?" he asked. "No," I said, "but I regret who didn't make it out." There was a long pause. "I lost someone too," he said, "in that same year." We sat with that. Not talking. Just sitting. Like 2 old pilots waiting for clearance they both knew wouldn't come. Finally, he said, "I have the power to put your name in the record. The real record." "I know," I said. "And if I did?" "I'd prefer you didn't." He studied me, that officer's gaze, trained to detect weakness, fear, hesitation. He found none. Just the calm of someone who'd already made peace with silence. "All right," he said. "Then I'll make you a promise. As long as I wear this uniform, your story will be respected, even if it's not public." "That's enough." He stood. I followed. Before I left, he offered one more thing. "Do you want anything?" I considered it. Paused. Then smiled. "A warm seat. And a quiet cup of coffee. Just like this." He nodded. "Slow. I can do that." As I stepped out into the hallway again, I passed that old photo. I stopped one more time. stared at the young man on the far right. Eagle oh 09. And I realized something. He didn't need recognition anymore. He just needed rest. Ellipsis. Back in the commissary, the air didn't move. No one was talking. No one was shopping. Every sound had vanished, like someone had hit the mute button on a world that was seconds away from exploding and just froze it. Major Trent was still standing where we'd left him, his shoulders square, but his face wasn't. He looked stunned. His hands hung awkwardly at his sides, fingers twitching slightly, as if grasping for authority that had just evaporated. The crowd wasn't big, maybe a dozen people at most, but they weren't going anywhere. A few held baskets that hadn't moved in minutes. One young airman had stopped stocking shelves entirely and stood with a can of green beans halfway to the rack. Forgotten. And then General Hale returned. He didn't march, didn't bark, he didn't need to. He just walked in, slow, steady, a figure that pulled the silence tighter with every step. I wasn't with him. I was still in his office, sipping what was left of my coffee, giving him space to do what needed doing. But I can imagine the look on his face. I'd seen it before, in pilots after a final mission, in medics after losing someone they couldn't save. That hard line between rage and reverence. He came to a stop a few feet from Trent. The major's jaw worked like he wanted to speak, but nothing came out. His mouth opened, then closed again. Hale didn't look at him. Not yet. He turned to the room instead. "I'm going to speak plainly," he said, voice firm but not loud, "because this moment demands clarity." He scanned the crowd, then finally let his eyes fall on Trent. "You all saw what happened here, and I won't pretend it didn't matter." Trent stiffened. What occurred was a failure of leadership, of judgment, and most of all, of respect. He took a step closer. "The man you tried to humiliate. Major, that's Walter Briggs. Callsign, Eagle oh 09. A whisper ran through the room. Some audible, some not. A couple of heads snapped up in disbelief. Someone muttered, "No way." But Hale didn't pause. He was the last man standing from Operation Iron Hail, a mission so classified most of you will never read the full report. He flew solo into hostile skies and returned with 9 confirmed kills. And then disappeared behind enemy lines. Trent swallowed hard. His voice, when it finally emerged, was small, almost boyish. "I didn't know." "No, you didn't," Hale cut in, "because you didn't ask, because you assumed." He turned back to the others. "Let this be a reminder to all of us. Rank means nothing without honor. And legacy isn't always worn on the sleeves." He looked at Trent now. Really looked. "You've spent your career chasing command. But today you met command. And it wasn't in the mirror." Trent's eyes dropped. His fists clenched. "I'm sorry, sir," he muttered. "Don't apologize to me," Hale said. "You didn't dishonor me. You dishonored the man who made your uniform possible." A moment passed. Then another voice broke the tension, young, but clear. It was the little girl. The same one who'd noticed my hat. She'd snuck back in, holding her mom's hand. Her eyes were fixed on Hale. But her words were for someone else. "Where's the man with the eagle?" Everyone looked at her. Hale softened. He crouched just enough to meet her height. "He's resting," he said gently, "but he's still flying." The little girl nodded like that made sense. Then pulled on her mom's arm and wandered off toward the bakery section. Mission accomplished. And in that moment, something shifted in the room. Not dramatic. Not loud. Just weight lifted. Hale turned to Chief Keller, who'd remained near the back, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "Chief," he said, "when Mr. Briggs finishes his coffee, I want you to see that he gets whatever he needs from this base. A seat, a quiet place, a warm lunch, if he wants it." Keller nodded. "Once." "Yes, sir." Hale turned to Trent one last time. "You're confined to quarters. Pending full review, you'll be reassigned to heritage research. Your job for the next year is to read every single after-action report from Vietnam to today. You will learn names, learn what sacrifice looks like, and you'll start with Eagle oh 09. Trent didn't argue, didn't protest, he just nodded, defeated. The general let the silence settle for one last beat, then walked out the way he came, the hum of overhead lights returning like a slow exhale. Shoppers began to move again. Slowly, quietly. And somewhere down the hallway, I finished my coffee and stood up. The day wasn't over yet. But the story had already changed. Ellipsis. There's a moment right before a storm hits where everything goes still. Like the world itself is holding its breath. That's what it felt like when General Hale looked me in the eye and asked, "What's your call sign, son?" I hadn't heard that word in decades. Son. It wasn't patronizing. It wasn't meant to make me feel small. Coming from him, it sounded more like a salute than a statement. The kind of thing a man says to another man he respects before he even knows why. I didn't answer right away. My mind drifted, not to the mission, not to the war, but to the moment the name was given. It wasn't some formal ceremony. It never is. Call signs are born in sweat and chaos and hard-earned survival. You don't choose them, they find you, and if you live long enough, they stick. I looked at Hale and said it plain. Quiet. They called me Eagle 09. That was it. 5 syllables. No drumroll, no flag waving. Just a name. And it cracked the room open. I saw his expression shift in real time. That composed military posture slipped just slightly. Like his spine forgot how to hold itself. His eyes widened, not with doubt, but with certainty. He knew. I could tell by the way he stepped back. Like I'd just walked out of a page in a history book that was never supposed to breathe again. He repeated the name once. Barely a whisper. Eagle 09? His aide, Captain Rhodes, froze mid-step as she returned from wherever he'd sent her. The coffee in her hand sloshed against the rim of the cup. But she didn't notice. Her eyes flicked to me. Then to him. Then back. "You've gotta be kidding me," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. I wasn't offended. That was the point. I wasn't supposed to exist. General Hale straightened slowly, but there was a different kind of stiffness in him now. Reverence, maybe, or disbelief, or guilt, probably all three tangled together like a malfunctioning parachute. He didn't sit. He didn't ask for proof. He just stood there, facing me like he'd stumbled into sacred ground. "Sir," he said, "do you know what that name means?" I nodded once. I do. But I also knew what he meant. He wasn't asking what it meant to me. He was asking what it meant to them, to the Air Force. To the legend that had somehow outgrown the man. "That name," he said, "is holy to every pilot who's ever trained since the 70s. Eagle 09 was a ghost story they told us at the academy. A myth. The pilot who shot down 9 MiGs in one engagement. Who went down behind enemy lines and vanished. No record, no funeral, just silence. That was by design," I said. "It wasn't a mission anyone wanted written down. But you survived." I did. "Alone?" I nodded again. "Alone." He rubbed a hand over his mouth and took another step back. Pacing in a tight half circle like his brain needed to move to keep from overheating. How did you make it out?" I glanced out the window. It took time, and a lot of help I couldn't afford to thank. He stopped moving. "You're supposed to be dead." I was. I didn't mean it as a metaphor. I meant it the way soldiers do. There's who you were before something, and who's left after. One is alive, the other is just walking around, finishing the mission. He didn't say anything for a long beat. Then, "I don't know what to do with this." I offered a slight smile. "Don't do anything, General. That's what I did for 50 years. Worked out fine." He shook his head. No. This matters. You're a part of our history. You're a." "Let me stop you right there," I said gently. "I'm a man who was lucky. Luckier than 4 others who didn't make it home. That's all." He looked like he wanted to argue. Then he didn't. "I saw a picture," he said finally. "Outside this office. 5 pilots. No smiles. You were far right, weren't you?" "Yeah. You were the youngest. Most reckless too." He laughed quietly, but it caught in his throat. Then his voice dropped lower. More personal. "I knew one of your team. Not well, just stories, but I remember the name. Captain Levi Morales. He used to be spoken of like a ghost in my dad's flight group." My throat tightened. Just the name was a gut punch I hadn't braced for. Levi was the best of us. "He died out there?" I nodded. "He and the others gave me the time to finish the mission." I lived because they didn't. General Hale stood there for a while, hands on his hips, eyes on the floor, like the gravity of it all was finally sinking in. When he looked back up, there was something different in him, less general, more man. He gestured toward a side cabinet in the room and pulled out a small wooden box. Inside was a challenge coin, thick and engraved, the kind you don't buy, the kind given only once. "This was mine when I took command of the base," he said. "I've only ever given one away. Until now." He held it out. I didn't take it at first. I looked him in the eyes. "I don't need medals, General. I left all that in the sky." "I know," he said. "This isn't for the sky. It's for the silence that followed." That hit harder than I expected. I took the coin. The metal felt warm, even though it hadn't been near heat. I looked down at it, then back at him. "I still don't want to be a monument," I said. "You're not," he replied. "You're a reminder." I nodded, and for the first time that day, I smiled without weight behind it. "Then I can live with that." He offered his hand. We shook. And somewhere deep inside, I felt the storm finally pass. Ellipsis. He closed the office door before he started talking. Not for secrecy, for respect. Some stories don't belong to the whole room. Some need walls, silence, and a man who understands the weight of what he's about to say. General Hale stood by the window with his hands clasped behind his back, staring out like he was looking at the sky but seeing something else entirely. "I went through the secure archives," he said, voice low. "We have 3 classified pages on Operation Iron Hail. 3, for an op that was supposed to change the air war." I didn't respond, just waited. I'd carried that silence for decades, I could carry it a little longer. He turned back to me. No names, no photos, just flight logs that cut off halfway through the engagement and a final line. "Mission concluded. 1 asset presumed lost." That was it. I took a sip of the fresh coffee Keller had brought earlier. Lukewarm now. Fitting. "You know," Hale continued, "in training, they used to tell us the story of Eagle 09 like it was a myth. A morale booster. They told it so we'd push through the flight sims. So we believed that one pilot could shift the course of a battle." "They weren't wrong," I said. "No, but they never told us about the rest of the team." I looked up. He saw it in my eyes, the shift, the wound. "They mattered," I said, "more than me. Levi, Miles, Hutch, Ramirez. They flew into hell, knowing they weren't coming back." He nodded. "Quiet now. I found something else," he said, walking to his desk. He unlocked a drawer and pulled out a faded folder. Not digital, paper. I had to call in a favor at Langley. Someone owed me a debt. This isn't supposed to exist. He opened the folder. Inside, a grainy black and white photo. 5 men in flight suits, standing beside an unmarked jet. Faces young, eyes serious. A mission too big for any of us. I stared at it. And for a moment, I wasn't in the office anymore. I was back on the tarmac. Hot sun on my neck. Leather gloves stiff with sweat. The smell of jet fuel in the air. Levi leaning on the wing, chewing gum like it was a habit he could never shake. God, we were young. Hale slid another document forward. "This," he said, "is from an intercepted Soviet report. Declassified just last year. It mentions a ghost flight. American aircraft that wiped out a MiG squadron in under 30 minutes. Said the pilot vanished afterward. They believed we'd developed a new kind of fighter jet." I smiled faintly. "I was the jet," I said. Hale chuckled once. It was dry, almost bitter. "They had a bounty on you. 20,000 rubles, dead or alive." I shook my head. "Not worth the trouble." He sat down again, across from me. "There's more." I waited. "There's a name listed as a liaison on your mission," he said. "Some kind of operations analyst. Civilian, embedded in command." He flipped the folder to the last page. I read the name. And for the first time that day, I felt the old fire return. "Caldwell." He nodded. "George Caldwell." I leaned back in the chair. "That man is now Deputy Director of Strategic Operations." I closed my eyes. All this time, Caldwell was supposed to handle intel, coordinate our insertion and extraction, But the comms blackout wasn't an accident. It wasn't bad timing or luck. It was deliberate. We'd been sent in blind, used. I always suspected, I said, voice quieter now. Levi had doubts the night before we deployed. He said something didn't feel right. Why didn't you say anything after? Because by the time I made it out, it was too late. Their bodies were gone. The story was buried, and I wasn't supposed to exist. You could have cleared your name, exposed him, and become a political pawn? No thanks. I'd rather fade than become someone's tool. Hale sat back, processing. I can't undo what happened, he said, but I can make sure the record's right, even if it stays sealed. That's all I ever wanted. We sat in silence again. And then he asked a question I hadn't heard in over 50 years. Do you remember the last thing Levi said to you? I stared at the coffee again. Then nodded. He said, Briggs, we finish the job, or we don't come home at all. I looked up. He kept his word. Hale nodded. His eyes were glassy now. The weight of history isn't in the facts, it's in the names. The voices, the things never recorded. I'm going to start a confidential briefing, he said, off the books, for future command staff, a course on legacy, on the real costs. He looked at me like he needed permission. You tell them what matters, I said, but leave the names out. Let the memory carry the weight, not the politics. He stood again. And this time, when he saluted, I returned it. Not because of rank. Because of understanding. Because the ghosts of Iron Hale were finally being seen. Ellipsis. The sun was starting to shift in the sky, casting longer shadows across the base by the time I stepped out of General Hale's office. I carried nothing with me. No papers, no medals, just a warm coffee still half full. And a coin in my pocket I hadn't asked for but now carried like a weight. Chief Keller met me just outside, standing at ease with that quiet look he wore like a second skin. He didn't say anything at first, just gave a nod, then fell into step beside me as we walked. You good, sir? He asked eventually. I didn't answer right away. I'm known again, I said. That's new. He gave a soft chuckle. Well, some of us never forgot. We just didn't know where to find you. We kept walking. Past the hangars, past the flagpole, past the plaque on the wall that listed the names of former commanders, a history so clean and curated. It couldn't possibly contain the weight of what really happened here. I've been asked before why I stayed quiet. I said finally, why I never tried to clear my name or set the record straight. You don't owe anyone an explanation, sir. Maybe not, I said, but I think I owe myself one. Keller stayed silent, just listened, which, truth be told, was what I needed most. The day after the mission, I said, I was found unconscious outside the Turkish border by a NATO recon team. No ID, no comms, just frostbite, a cracked rib, and a whole lot of blood that wasn't mine. Keller didn't flinch. They flew me to Ramstein, put me in a black room with 3 men in suits who asked the same questions over and over again, not to get answers, but to make sure I'd never speak them. He nodded slowly. One of those men was Caldwell? Yeah. And he made you disappear? He said it was cleaner. That the narrative needed simplicity. That Eagle 09 died a hero was a stronger message than Eagle 09 lived and saw too much. I looked out across the runway as AC-130 lifted off in the distance, its engines roaring against the wind. They offered me a new name, a pension, a promise that I'd be left alone, if I promised to leave them alone. You took the deal. I did. And then? I went home, back to Georgia, took a job fixing radios at a supply depot. No questions, no uniforms, just static and wires and long silences. He looked over at me. That couldn't have been easy. I let out a dry breath. I buried more than my name. Keller. I buried a son. He stopped walking. I kept going for a few steps, then turned. He enlisted the day he turned 18. I said, didn't tell anyone. He wanted to surprise me, said he wanted to carry the torch. Serve like I did. Keller's expression shifted, solemn and still. 2 years in, he got shipped to Kandahar. His Humvee hit an IED. There was nothing left to bring home but a flag and a tag. I'm sorry. I didn't go to the funeral. Why? I looked at him. There wasn't anger in my voice. Just ache. Because I wasn't supposed to exist. Keller said nothing. And here's the worst part. I continued. He never knew who I really was. Never knew his father was the man in the ghost stories. I never told him. Never told anyone. Because I thought the silence was noble. That fading was the price I paid to survive. I looked down. But now, I'm not so sure. The wind picked up slightly. Keller zipped his jacket halfway. But didn't move otherwise. You did what you had to do. He said, but maybe now, it's time to do what they need you to do. And what's that? Let them remember you. Not for the medals. For the choices. I stared at the horizon. For the first time in years. It didn't feel like a place I was trying to reach. It just felt open. I told General Hale I didn't want to be a monument. I said, and I meant it. But maybe a whisper isn't enough anymore. We stood there, two silhouettes between hangars and history. Between memory and moment. Keller took a step forward. Can I ask you something, sir? Sure. Why did you keep the cap? I touched the brim of the old flight cap still on my head. The stitching was loose. The patch nearly faded. It didn't even sit straight anymore. Because it was the one thing no one told me to give back. He smiled. Then maybe it's time more people see it. I nodded. Not as a statement, as a beginning. And somewhere behind us, a jet screamed across the sky, loud, proud, and unmistakably alive. Ellipsis. They gave me a seat by the window. Not in an office, not in a ceremony, just a plain wooden bench outside the office's club. Tucked beneath an old oak tree that had stood longer than most men on base. Shade rolled across the walkway like spilled paint. The breeze carried the scent of jet fuel, grass, and distant rain. Someone had brought me coffee. Not Keller this time, a young airman I didn't recognize. He'd left it without a word. Just a nod, and moved on. That was enough. No fanfare, no questions. It had been a few hours since my conversation with Hale. The storm had passed. I could feel it in my bones. In the air. In the way people looked at me now. Not like I was in the way. Not like I was a leftover from someone else's story. They looked at me like I was the story. That made me uncomfortable. But maybe that was okay. From where I sat, I could see part of the flight line. A refueling crew moved like clockwork around an aircraft. Hands practiced. Voices efficient. Nothing flashy. Just good work. Done well. I liked that. Keller walked up a few minutes later and sat beside me without asking. Afternoon, he said. Still, I replied. We sat there a long time without talking. He finally asked, You think they'll remember you? I sipped my coffee. Maybe, maybe not, but I think they'll remember today. That's enough. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Hale's drafting a brief, internal training for incoming officers. Wants your mission included. Says he won't name you directly. But, they'll know. Good, I said. Let the legend stay bigger than the man. We watched as two F-16s cut across the sky. Sharp, fast, beautiful. You ever miss it? He asked. The sky? He nodded. I smiled. I don't miss the danger. Or the noise. Or the rules that made too much sense on paper and none in real life. But flying, yeah, I miss the part where it's just you. The machine, and the edge of the world. He didn't speak for a bit. Then. I think the story matters more now than it ever did. Why? Because people forget the quiet ones. He said, the ones who did the impossible. Then walked away without asking for applause. That's the only kind of story I believe in. Another silence. Then the sound of footsteps. We turned to see a small group approaching. Not many, 4 or 5 young recruits in base T-shirts. Hesitating near the path like they didn't want to interrupt. The tallest one stepped forward. Sir, are you the man from the commissary earlier? The one General Hale. I cut him off gently. I'm just someone who chose the right can of soup. That caught them off guard. The group chuckled awkwardly. The tall one nodded. Well, sir, thank you, for everything. He didn't say what everything meant. He didn't have to. They walked away slowly, and Keller looked over at me. The right can of soup, huh? It's how all great wars start. He laughed, shook his head. Then something strange happened. I reached into my jacket pocket. Pulled out the challenge coin Hale had given me earlier that day. Ran my thumb across the surface. Then, without a word, I handed it to Keller. His eyes widened. "I can't take that." "You can," I said, "because it was never mine to keep." He looked down at the coin. "People are gonna ask what this means." "You tell them," I said, "that it's from a man who never needed to be remembered. Just understood." He stared at it like it was heavier than gold. Then, quietly, "I'll take care of it." "I know you will." A long moment passed. Keller stood. "You need anything else before I head out?" I looked around. Trees, sky, the smell of coffee, the sound of jets far off. Just out of view. "No," I said, "I've got a warm seat and a quiet cup. That's all I ever wanted." He nodded, turned to leave, then stopped. "You know what, sir? I think the eagle still flies." I smiled and adjusted my cap. It always did. People just stopped looking up. He walked away, leaving me there in the quiet. Not alone. Not forgotten. Just at peace. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a ghost. I felt like a man who finally got to land. Ellipsis. If you've made it this far, thank you. Stories like this aren't just about war, or medals, or uniforms. They're about memory, about how easy it is to forget the quiet ones, the men who carried more than they ever said, and never asked to be remembered. But sometimes, one moment, one name, is enough to wake an entire room. If Eagle '09 meant something to you today, if it made you think of your father, your brother, your CO, or someone who never made it home, I hope you'll share this. Say their names out loud. Because silence may be honorable, but remembrance is sacred. And if you're new here, I'd be honored to have you subscribe. More stories like this are coming. Until next time, keep your eyes sharp, your coffee hot, and don't ever underestimate the man standing quietly in line.